Hey innovators, Jason here, and welcome to Season 3 of the Drop-Tine Innovators podcast. And for those listening to the original free public podcast, of course, we've been going for almost 8 seasons. And we're really just getting started, and I'm looking forward to some new things this year on the podcast. And now having the Supercast platform as a host, I have greater confidence in episodes landing on your device in a timely manner. This first episode of Season 3 is with a guest who you'll surely get to know much more in the near future, but you haven't heard him on a podcast because this was Will's first podcast recording, and he clearly nailed it. In the last episode with MSU graduate student Luke Resop, you heard Luke talking about some new groundbreaking wild turkey research at Mississippi State led by Will Fowler. This research piqued my interest not only because land handling for wild turkeys is a primary goal of mine on my own personal farm in Pennsylvania, but because over 26 years ago, as an undergraduate student at Mississippi State, I worked under Dr. Mark Smith, then a graduate student of the legendary quail researcher Dr. Wes Berger, on a similar study using human imprinted bobwhite quail chicks. And in that project, I got to be mama for hundreds of bobwhite quail chicks. The thought of combining the research of human imprinted turkey poults with regenerative and conventional food plotting treatments and all the hard work that I've put into developing food plot blends for specific management scenarios super excites me. As you'll hear in this episode with Will, we're all going to learn so much that we can directly and immediately apply to our properties. In fact, I've already enjoyed getting valuable feedback on the seed blends that I've developed with the Drop-Tine Seed Company for the Mississippi State projects. And we've already discussed some ideas for new blends, different varieties, different species combinations, approaches to alternative management strategies, and of course, improvements to existing blends based on what the early data show. To me, this is true innovation. Creating products based on instant feedback from researchers, from our own personal farms, and of course, from you, our customers all across the country. In fact, this is one of the main reasons that we are on track to sell well over 20 million pounds of seed in 2025 alone. Yep, you heard that right. 20 million pounds of seed sold in 2025. Not bad for a seed company that I started because so many of my consulting clients were disappointed with the food plot products that they were using, and likewise, I was disappointed with the food plot products that I found in sheds and barns all across the country. So thank you all for being a key part of that huge success. For illustrations of what Will and I discuss in this episode, including a picture of a 10-day-old poult and the different habitat treatments that Will references in the podcast, you can jump on the Drop-Tine podcast Facebook and Instagram pages. Enjoy the show.
Hey guys, this is Will Fowler with the MSU Deer Lab and MSU Game Bird program, and you're listening to the Drop-Tine Innovators podcast.
Welcome back, Drop-Tine podcast listeners. All right, last episode, Luke Resop and I hopefully didn't steal too much of my next guest's thunder. We kept mentioning it, that we were stealing his information and his data, and really the most exciting part of research, to me anyway, which is the initiation, the beginning, all the questions, and just commencing the whole project. So today, since we already talked about him quite a bit, Will Fowler is with us from the MSU Deer Lab and such. Will, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Super excited. This is your first podcast, I think, right?
Yes, sir. Yep. I am new to it, but excited to get started and talk about some management.
Well, we've had some conversations already about, I guess, all kind of things, and you're going to be phenomenal when it comes to shooting from the hip on this. And I just want to sit and chat about this. Is super exciting research. You know, I'll just say this kind of as an introductory. When I started learning about more, I'll just call them more regenerative practices, or really using nature's way, farming in nature's image, cutting inputs that may, I guess, possibly be needed more in production agriculture. But I started to think, this is going back a decade. Why are we doing this on wild, legacy properties that we own, that they seek to hand down? We're trying to create habitat, produce great deer hunting. Do we really need all of these extensive production ag practices? And at that time, I guess I'm going to age myself. I turkey hunted through the 90s. The Dick Kirby, Denny Golvis, Preston Pittman era of turkey hunters, and populations were on the rise. And so I've seen the flocks of well over 100, the wintertime flocks of well over 100. I can recall, I'm going to say roughly 2009, 10 on my farm, noticing that turkey numbers were on the decline. Now, obviously nothing crazy, but they were certainly on the decline. And there was a year in there, I can't remember what year, my son completed his turkey slam when he was 8. And right around when he was 10, he came to me and he said, I don't think we should kill any more turkeys. He said, we're just not seeing what we've seen. And we stopped at that point. He may have killed one or two more, but we cut it off. And I started eliminating insecticides, eliminating tillage, introducing hyper-diversity, cocktail blends, and just all that fun stuff onto the farm. And right around, I'd say maybe 2 years after that, on video, on a trail cam, I finally got my first group of Poults in like 4 years. And we've had some since, but again, I think it's still, our populations are still struggling. And I get to travel all over and visit with clients. And there are some guys who've been like, you know what, we have so many turkeys, they're like rats. And then there's others who are like, I've noticed what you've been saying is the numbers are on the decline. So I'm super excited. When I eliminated a lot of the inputs and tillage, I noticed observation rates of Poults, once again, not stellar, but we actually saw them. There were years where we didn't see any, and got super excited. And I remember saying, hey, this is working. This is great. So I'm excited that you're here to scientifically step in and seek truth and ask questions and try to figure this out with some real tangible data. So can you kind of, in a 30-second commercial or in a nutshell, talk about your research and what you're going to do over the next few years?
Yeah. So basically, what we're doing is comparing conventional wild or food plot management, how everybody's usually done it, with tillage, herbicide, fertilizer, comparing that with a couple regenerative methods that we're using in food plots. And we've got a couple different treatments there, but we're also comparing all that to old field or early successional habitat management using fire and disking. But yeah, we're trying to see the basically efficacy, I guess, of how well turkey Poults forage and move, how far they can move in these different treatments, and looking at the possibility of regenerative techniques being used in food plots and how that might fit into brood habitat or brood cover management.
So really I guess in a nutshell, you're kind of looking at two, is it fair to say you're looking at two major things? Number one is
Yeah,
the foraging abundance and availability. So looking at, I guess here we go with the big words, right? We'll say arthropods you know,
I try to say invertebrates
yeah,
because we also have you get snails and spiders in there, and everything's classed differently, I suppose. But yeah, we're looking at what invertebrates are there in the different treatments, and then we're looking at what the turkey poults eat during their foraging trial. And then we're also looking at how far they're able to move, how easily they're able to move in those different treatments, different vegetation compositions. And paired with that, we're also looking at some different vegetation metrics that we think are important and might tell us a little bit about how well turkey poults are able to move through the
dude,
vegetation.
awesome. So kind of bouncing back to the first one on invertebrates. So we're looking at insects, think spiders, like you said, snails as well.
Yeah.
I mentioned in my podcast with Luke back in the, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, I worked for a graduate student at the time, Mark Smith,
Mm-hmm.
at Mississippi State. Mark is now Dr. Smith at Auburn. I think he's still there, under the great Dr. Wes Berger. And we imprinted northern bobwhite quail chicks, really to look at or assess habitat-specific arthropod availability. So when I heard that you guys were doing this, I got super excited because being a part of that project back then was mind-blowing to me as an undergrad student. And I'm kind of anxious. I mean, obviously, a lot of the methods are similar. There's a couple things that are different, not drastically, but this touches a personal aspect for me because that research. I mean, I went down to Mississippi State because I enjoyed whitetails and turkeys,
Right.
and predators. I thought were really cool too. Never expected to get so deep in with bobwhites, but just absolutely loved researching them. So I guess comparing that research in that paper to this, I'm sure you've read the 2005 paper by Smith.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Now, is there anything that you guys are going to, I mean, have you piggybacked anything off of that or?
Yeah. I think we've piggybacked a little bit just methodology wise. And figuring out how long foraging trials should be, looking at, wanting to do as many poults, wanting to forage as many poults in the treatments as possible. And yeah, I mean, really just the methodology part. And I mean, looking at differences in different vegetation types and different cover. Ours is a little bit different just because it's actual food plotting, and I think theirs was field borders and then ag fields. But it's similar, but ours is definitely a little bit different. And yeah, we're just trying to figure out some cool stuff, and this hasn't been done with turkey poults many times. I think, well, actually, I know Bill Healy from West Virginia. He did a ton of it back in the late 70s through the 80s, and then there was a few papers here and there. George Hurst here at Mississippi State did one, I think, back in the early 90s, looking at how poults foraged between burned and unburned treatments. And then, the most recent one was back in 2014. Ryan Tebow did something similar to what we're doing, actually he was looking at basically if they were using fully wild turkeys and then commercially bought turkey poults as well to see if the commercially bought birds acted any differently, foraged any differently, moved any differently, and basically seeing what the efficacy was to use them in this type of research. And they did that in grassland settings in Illinois. But yeah, I mean, that's the most recent, and that's about the full scope of turkey foraging and imprinting projects. There's been much more done on quail.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot done on, really, in relative terms, there's not a lot of it done on either of them, in my opinion. It's fantastic research.
Well, it's definitely intensive. you work a lot of hours and need a lot of help.
But I can relate. I can relate to that, being one of Mark's primary research technicians. And fortunately for me, I had to get to class a lot of times. So I was like, Mark, I got to go. We've been doing this for 2 or 3 hours. I can't whistle anymore. That's one of the things I laughed when I heard that you're playing a recording. I'm like, man, why didn't we think of that?
Well, and I piggybacked that. I piggybacked a lot of stuff on the design off of so many different projects. So a lot of different citations in my thesis for sure. But yeah, the sound kind of came from my advisor, Dr. Mark McConnell here at Mississippi State. He was doing some quail research similar to what you and Mark did. And they were using like a water whistle that played over a speaker. And I was like, all right, well, that's cool, but let's make it something that actually sounds like a turkey, because why not? So yeah, that's kind of how we decided to do that.
Yeah, I just had a whistle. So I know I did most of the imprinting, if not all of it. It's been so long. But then Matt Kaminsky, who went to school with me, he helped us with some of it. But I just had a whistle. I actually still do it with my chickens to this day, and I can call the chickens all the way across the pasture with just a couple whistles. But
that's pretty cool.
I think I've got a copy of it. This is yours right here. So I noticed at the end there, which, man, I no offense to anyone, but that's kind of weak. I think we need to get old Denny Golvis and Dick Kirby and Damon Davis and Walter Parrott. I mean, some of those guys make some assembly calls that'll make you cry.
Yeah.
And I like the Kiki run at the end. I like that, but man, that assembly call could use some work.
It probably could. I'll be honest. I was debating on whether using that call or doing my own. And I had one of my technicians come by my office when we were getting everything ready, and I had him record me playing a call, and it just did not sound good. And then I tried just doing it with my mouth at one point, and it just didn't. I can call turkeys in, but it doesn't sound pretty.
No, that's good stuff. Anything's going to work as long as they recognize you as mama and say, all right, this is the safety. When I get cold, this is the dude who wraps me up in a blanket. We're all good.
Right. And well, the technicians, they did honestly most of that. I was running around doing bed sampling and just coordinating stuff. So I had a ton of help, and I'm super thankful for all of them.
Yeah, that was Mark's excuse too.
Hey, it's you might have thought it was an excuse, but it's actually true.
Well, we were at the vet school at the time, and it was just all grass, as I remember. But I'd just stand there and whistle and walk around and whistle, and it's a good time. So, all right, so I'm curious. There's a lot of these papers start off with the fact that again, invertebrates, arthropods, whatever, are an important source of essential amino acids and protein think about how fast quail chicks and turkey poults grow, right? I mean, they're growing so rapidly, putting on feathers. Obviously, this is a massive part of what they need to have a great start in life.
Right.
So we know that that's important, that connection. But do you think, and this is, I guess maybe it's based on your literature review. I'm sure you've read more literature in the last several months than you ever thought you would, with a lot more to come.
Yeah.
Do you think that, I'll try to stick to the word invertebrates, insects, whatever, are ever is it a limitation for turkey poult? If I mention quail chicks, I'm kind of lumping. I realize it's two different things here, but
Yeah.
for these chicks
It's all right.
poults as they grow. In other words, do we have areas, do you think, on the landscape where it's a limiting factor, where we just don't have enough invertebrates?
Yeah. I think, this isn't like part of my research, so it's just anecdotal and, thinking about, like, a lot of papers have shown that, the more species diversity in plants usually leads to more species diversity and abundance in insects, invertebrates, what have you. So yes, I think that in some cases there definitely are limitations to how many invertebrates are out there. But then you can get down to the nitty gritty and say, well, there might actually be a lot of invertebrates in a stand of something that's, just a couple of species, but some of them, or a lot of them, more of them might be the herbivores, not the predator insects. And I think that, at least for turkeys, some of what we might see is that there actually might be a lot of invertebrates out there in a stand of vegetation in the cover, but they might not be available to the poults because they're 6 inches tall. And we can get into that a little bit more later,
Yes.
just off of initial stuff. But
yeah, that's good stuff, and we will. But I want to backtrack because you're killing it. You're on page 7. I'm on page 2 here.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. You've brought up the buzzwords for me, which is you've mentioned species diversity.
Yeah.
And then obviously species richness. And then when I learned some of the wildlife ecologists and professors now have I've been doing this for 25 years. I've heard many times where they've admitted that they taught us wrong, which is really great to hear. I remember I'm sure you have a wildlife techniques manual in your studies that was like our Bible, right? Mm-hmm. And I brought this up before. I remember Dr. Damaris's class, we learned how to, use severing houses. I just dropped my pen. Process of aging based on tooth wear and replacement. And then they were like, oh crap, this edition was a year off. So we taught all these students, wrong. And I'm like, so, all right. I remember being so excited about that lab. I was like, I've got to get all these jawbones right. Like, this is me. This is my niche. And I got 100 on them. I was fired up. And now in hindsight, it bothers me that I actually did. I probably didn't get them all right.
Hey, nobody ever gets all of those jawbones right anyways. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But
the funny thing is we probably all, at best, you're only 40% accurate on that process anyway. So
I think it's like 80% accuracy, like with trained biologists usually, but I might be off on that. I can't remember.
So the 1 year, many years ago, it's way off topic, but a group of guys, and I don't know if it's Jacobson or who it was now. No, you know what? I think it was Ken G from the Noble Foundation in Oklahoma. He took a bunch of known-age jawbones to the Southeast Deer Study Group, and I feel like it was in.
I know what you're talking about.
I think it was in Missouri that year because I was there. And these are like they'll say, the accuracies that I love hearing my taxidermists and hunters tell me how accurate they are, how accurate that process is. Now imagine you're at the Southeast Deer Study Group, so you've got, in theory, anyway, the best of the best. Now I had one colleague who was like, "Think about it, Jay. These guys are researchers. They're not like if you want to get the experts, go to Mississippi, go to all of the conservation officers in each region." Those guys and gals are going to be better. So anyway, in theory, this was supposed to be the best of the best. I think it was like 43% or something like that.
I've heard I've heard a version of that story as well, and
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't there,
I may
but
be missing details. Anyway, yeah, don't let the truth get in the way of the story. But so
right.
species richness. Can you? I was going to just do it, but I'll make you do it since you're the grad student. You've got species richness, species diversity, and then this thing called species equity or evenness. And that's what I was saying. I don't even know if they use that terminology anymore.
I don't even know if they do either, honestly.
Yeah, that might be one of those things they dropped. They I know it was in all my textbooks, but go
Yeah.
ahead and talk about those things because I think they're going to be important later on when we start talking about both in this podcast and in the future when we come back around to this, when we start talking about the differences in invertebrate species, richness and diversity and equity or evenness, whatever, in each of your treatments, regen, conventional, and old field management.
So, yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of papers that I've read, and I can't remember names right off the top of my head, but they mostly, not fully consistently, but pretty much consistent. They show that, with more species richness, so different types of species, plant-wise, you're going to see more invertebrates in abundance, so more of them in number, but also a greater diversity of them as well. So more of the different types of invertebrates. And we're looking at that based on, in our treatments, we've got some regen plots that have more species in them, more species planted. And then the conventional plots, it's, 2 or 4 species planted. And then in the old field treatments, the early successional treatments, it varies. I mean, just based on site, some sites have a greater diversity of species, of vegetative species than others. There's one site that probably has, I would guess, 40 to 50 different just forbs and other things growing in it in the old fields. And then there's another site that only has maybe 10. And we haven't looked at the data too much yet, but what my idea is that hopefully those treatments that have a lot more species of plants, either planted or managed with fire or disking, we think based on the literature that those will have a greater diversity and abundance of invertebrates.
Absolutely. So I think I've probably failed here. I should have mentioned this in the beginning. I think the ultimate goal of all of this is, and I know we have a bunch of land handlers. Sorry, I use an old Stoddard terminology. Land handlers, land managers who love wild turkeys. Like I've got one in Missouri. He's a client of mine. He's a friend of mine, and he likes his deer. But man, when it comes to turkeys, he's all ears. He's going to love this podcast. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, or at the end of your research, the goal is to give the managers a paper that says, hey, if this is what you're looking for, these are the types of management. And as human beings, we tend to be very polarized on everything, politics, hunting, everything.
Yeah.
And I think, you got to tease out, okay, maybe we should put 1 or 2 of these regen plots in here, to help with brood habitat or bugging areas, et cetera. And that's the end goal of all of this. It's cool to talk about it. It's really fun. But the end goal is to hand over, basically some management activities that they can do to help. Like in the beginning, when I mentioned our populations were low, fortunately, turkeys can respond pretty quickly. There are things that work against them, like, spring weather, et cetera.
Right.
But we can most certainly help. So I'm curious as we get into this. So like you said, there's no doubt when you increase plant species diversity, you introduce, more species. So think low diversity would be a genetically modified, Roundup ready soybean field. And this is what I crawled around on my belly in when I had human imprinted quail chicks. A lot of the habitat types were corn and beans. So I would expect that species richness and diversity and evenness would all be very, very poor compared to an old field, right? That was burned and disked and et cetera. So at the end of the day, I think I'm intrigued to hear more about species richness, which is just the number of different species in the community, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, because some of this stuff to old guys gets we don't practice this every day, but so in other words, like what are some of the most common? Just rattle off 3 common insects that you or spider, whatever that you pull out.
So one
Have
site.
you gotten that? Maybe you haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, and we've seen it anecdotally. We haven't had all of the invertebrates from our vacuum samples where we're seeing what's in the plots. We haven't had those invertebrates identified yet.
Okay. Yeah.
We're working with the MSU entomology department. They've been a huge help, and they're actually helping process those samples and then IDing them for us, which is going to be much more accurate than I could have done myself. And it's saving me time to do other things that are important to the project. But they've started to process some of the samples and sort through them. I've helped with a few so far. And I'll be honest, a lot of the things, I don't know what they are. I've noticed some aphids. There's been a couple with ants in them that are pretty heavy with ants. There's one study site that we have that was chock full of snails in every single treatment. And I don't know if that has anything to do with what's planted or how it's managed. Mm-hmm. I just thinking about it, I don't think so, because it's a site in the Black Prairie of Mississippi, and it just holds water. And we had a lot of water this spring and early summer. Now we're dry, but the snails were just everywhere. And we got some of them in the vacuum samples, but man, the turkeys were tearing them up.
That's awesome.
Tearing them up.
So this is where you get into preference, right? I always bring this up because Dr. Rick Kaminsky was a great teacher, and he handed out, I think this is very relevant for this paper, or for your research. He handed out the little half-size Ziploc bags to each of us in the class. And in there, he had miniature, like, candy bars, Snickers, whatever, I can't remember. And he's like, all right, now everybody pick one and eat it. And leave your wrapper sitting in front of you. And I don't know, I ate probably a Kit Kat. And he's like, now look at your neighbor. You know, is there something in your neighbor's bag that you'd prefer? And of course, this went on for 30 or 40 minutes. At the end of the deal, we're like, oh, shoot, just because I ate the Kit Kat doesn't mean I don't actually prefer Snickers, because Snickers was not in my bag. I didn't have the opportunity to eat it. So that whole snail conversation on the Black Prairie kind of reminds me of that exercise. So you're talking, when we're talking species richness, let's just assume we went through this one study site and, you know, you got, I don't know, a couple aphids and ants and no snails. So the species richness would just be, you know, the aphids and the ants. That's all that's there. That doesn't mean that if there wasn't something else, or if there was something else, the quail could possibly, or Poults could possibly go after that first. It's just not there. So that's why I always enjoy when guys are like, hey, my deer prefer this food plot product over everything else. I'm like, dang, man, you are busy. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you have everything planted in that one area, close, you know, same proximity to the edge. And, oh, no. Well, then you don't know that they prefer it.
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, there's definitely more than ants and aphids in the in those samples for sure. But I mean, they're flies and wasps, but they're pretty diverse. It seems like the vacuum samples, just the few I've been through, and I can't even remember what treatments those are from. they look pretty good. There's a lot of different species or families, or however you're measuring it in those samples.
Yeah. Now, have you gone through a season yet?
Yeah. So I've done my first season of field work. We'll do another year next spring into summer, but I probably won't have my invertebrate data back until this coming November/December, somewhere around in there. But once that comes around, I'll be able to actually tell you how the species richness of these treatments, and really get into the nitty gritty and analyze, what's there versus what's available to the Poults.
Good deal. Well, we're going to make you promise to come back on here and share it with us, since we're your first ever podcast.
Yes, sir.
No, that's cool. That's where the rubber meets the road once you start to get those data back. Now, I hate to beat this richness, diversity, equity, evenness, and preference to death, but thinking about like species evenness, for example, if let's say again, this is just examples. I'm not saying this is the case, but at Black Prairie, let's say only a few snails showed up next year.
Right.
And you've got boatloads of a specific aphid and a grasshoppers or whatever else they're consuming, but there's only a few snails in relative abundance, but they're eating every single one. Or their crops are full of snails. Now we're starting to show preference because it's in low availability and showing up in the crop. Would you agree with that?
Well, partially, yes, but also, you've got to think about, like, snails can't move. They can, but not that fast. And turkeys, like, the snails are easy for the Poults to catch up to or eat. But then you've got a fast moving insect like a grasshopper that they're only 10 days old, the Poults are, and they're just not able to catch it. They're not as good at hunting yet. And that kind of plays into what's available to them, because if there's a lot of invertebrates out there that are fast moving, but the Poults just can't catch them, then you kind of run into a problem. And I wouldn't say they preferred the snails necessarily. I think it's just they're the easiest to consume.
Yeah.
In that one study site.
Nice. Good answer. I'm giving you an A on that one. Good job.
Thanks.
Are they using these snails, do you think, as grit?
I have no clue, honestly. I really don't know. I will say, though, when we were dissecting the Poults, so we cut open the crops, and after we took them through the trials, and then we euthanized them, and then within a couple of weeks we would dissect the crops in the necropsy lab, and a couple of the Poults from this specific site had eaten over 100 snails a piece.
Now this is a day old. I'm sorry, this is a 10-day-old Poult.
10-day-old, and like conceptually, I don't know how they fit all that in their little tiny crop, but it's an elastic organ, so I guess they just stuffed them in. But yeah, they loved them.
That's awesome.
And that was only from 3 of them that we counted. I'm sure there were a couple more that were in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Holy moly. Now, for reference, I'll show on the Drop-Tine podcast Facebook page, I'll show between now and when we actually air this, I'll show some photos of what a 10-day-old Poult would look like. Just so you could imagine 100 or 75 or whatever snails in the crop. That's insane. So
I don't know exactly how much Poults at that age weighed, at least the Poults I had. I think it's between 70 to 90 grams or so, but they're about 6 inches tall. That's the easiest to conceptualize it. They're about the size of a wild bobwhite.
Yeah.
Of a grown wild bobwhite,
And not very heavy at all.
No, but yeah, they're only about 6 inches tall, so they're not big.
You sent me a photo, I think, of you or a technician foraging them, and I saw a pair of lacrosse boots with the Poults running around them, and it reminded me of, like, you're almost, you're trying to be very careful that you don't step on the darn things initially.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Good deal. Okay, I got that whole richness, diversity, and evenness. I mean, as far as species evenness, it's like, if something new shows up, say a new insect, is it represented, is it fairly abundant or equally abundant, or is it just, that new species shows up once or twice, right? The fact that it shows up gives you a whole richness, okay, check mark, but how even is it, or how many of them are there? And
that diversity is a combination of the two.
Yeah, and knowing the treatments, the differences, I mean, such a drastic difference between your treatments. Mm-hmm. It's going to be fascinating to see, number one, how many different species show up, and then the numbers of each one represented, I think.
Right. And we're actually, this is just a side note, we're only classifying them down to family, the invertebrates, that is. Yeah. But it'll still be, I mean, anecdotally, I talked to one of the entomologists that is helping with this, and he said, man, like, there was 12 to 15 different families in your one bag.
Hey guys, we're about 42 minutes into another fantastic episode, and we're about to dig deeper into the weeds on Will's fascinating research on wild turkey poult foraging ecology, specifically as it relates to regeneratively managed and conventionally managed food plots. There's still a full hour and 15 minutes left to this episode over on the Drop-Tine Innovators podcast platform. To hear the rest of Will's episode and gain access to all past and future premium content, you can become a Drop-Tine Innovator by heading over to droptine.supercast.com. Again, that's droptine.supercast.com. And once you're signed up, you can listen to Will and I discuss more of his research in depth and also cover his goals for his project that will ultimately hand over a truckload of habitat management information for you, the hunter manager. I'll also ask Will what he thinks about refining the food plot blends that I build so they target optimal wild turkey poult foraging, which of course equates to better recruitment rates of wild turkeys on your property. We love that you tuned in to the free public version of the Drop-Tine podcast, and there are many more free episodes to come, giving you an idea of the type of uncensored wildlife management and hunting-related deep dives that we go on. Coming up soon, I will air more about my obsession with chronic wasting disease as I discuss CWD-related topics that are rarely or never covered or simply ignored in mainstream media. My goal with CWD research and journalism is not to make enemies or argue, but to ensure that the scientific method, as I learned it, is followed to a T. To me, science is the journey of asking the right questions while seeking the truth. I don't care what your opinions are on CWD, and I believe everyone is entitled to their own version. But if you want to openly discuss the complexity of the topic, the recent research, where we've gone wrong, and why so much is often ignored or just skipped over, well, then you're welcome on the podcast. So once again, visit droptine.supercast.com and sign up to become a Drop-Tine Innovator member. We look forward to having you in the community. Thank you for listening.